Hi everyone, this is Júlio de Lima. I'm a principal QA engineer at Capco, United States. And today I'm here to talk about 7 highly valuable approaches for REST API testing. I'm very glad to be here at TestFlix 2024. And I hope that at the end of this session, you'll learn a lot of new stuff that will help you on your tests. So let's start by the first one. Checking the JSON Web Token structure. The idea here is to look inside the token that you are trafficating between the endpoints of your REST API. Behind this token, there is a structure that should be validated. And the code that you are seeing here now, it's a code that was created using a JavaScript unit test structure together with a library called JSON Web Token. This library allows you to decode a token and then, based on some assertion library like chai, you'll be able to evaluate some information that are inside this object that are behind the token. It will allow you to do these checks and to assure that the token is trafficating the object in a proper manner. So the second approach is called functional code review. The idea here is to have the code that was created by the developers being evaluated by you, a tester that knows a lot about how to evaluate the functional side of the application. The code that was created by the developer could have some issues related to the business rules or the way that it functions. So the idea is that you, as a tester, will look at the code and will notice that the developer creates some issues when creating the code, and then you will be able to identify these issues based on the requirements that you already know very well. So for example, in this code, you see that the function is trying to identify if the user is an admin. But instead of to compare the user.role with admin, the code is comparing user.role with user. So you find a defect here. So you can report this defect and then the developers will work on it. So the third approach is simulating exception cases for integration. This one is very effective. What happens is that when you are testing in an end-to-end perspective, you have the API connected with another real API. And it's very difficult to have counter of the other APIs, right? So instead of to rely on them and to expect that they will sometime fail, you can just replace those real APIs by mocks and then create some specific scenarios where the APIs that your API is calling are unavailable, for example, or returning an error that will probably never return when you are talking about a real API. So here in this code, you can see that I am using a library called knock. You can use any other libraries, but here I'm using knock. So you can see that I'm simulating a third-party service and what is the reply that I'm going to provide. And then as soon as my API is requesting some endpoint, this endpoint will request that mock that was created using knock. And then I expect that my API have a specific status code that will show me that the API, the third-party API, is not working as expected. So we can do this kind of simulations using mocks, and then using knock is a good approach to try to do this kind of stuff. So let's go to the fourth approach, load testing. Yeah. So many people think that it's better to run a load test against a web application with a user interface. However, if you wait until the application is ready, maybe it's so late. So the idea is, instead of to just focus your load testing in a web application, you can do it through this web service. So you can hit specifically your APIs, your endpoints of your APIs using some library or some tool. Here in this example, you see that I'm using K6, which is a very good tool that you can find in JavaScript, for example. And then you can basically define how many virtual users you will have, what will be the duration of this test, and then you can write a quick and small test to get some of your endpoints, or post or put or delete, and then you can add some checks that will basically provide you some guidance related to some perspectives that you would like to see. You can add thresholds that will help you to validate if the API is working fine from a load testing perspective. So using K6, you'll be able to run these load tests and then evaluate if your APIs are responding from a very good perspective when talking about efficiency or performance. So let's go to the fifth approach, which is REST API test coverage. It's possible to understand if your test automation are covering all the parts that your API contains, right? The idea is that you can basically run your tests against the API, register some records related to the tests that you already run, and after that, to compare the Swagger against the tests that were run and the endpoints that was hit based on the tests that you run. The idea here is to use some framework or some tool, for example, Swagger coverage, to basically compare the results related to the endpoints that were hit during your test automation execution against the Swagger. So Swagger coverage can provide it to you. You can use Swagger coverage by adding the library to your REST Assure project, and then it will generate automatically this traceability between the tests that you run and the endpoints that were hit, and then using Swagger coverage yet, a binary that comes with this library, you'll be able to compare the Swagger against these endpoints that were hit, and then Swagger coverage will provide you a report showing what were coverage and what is the coverage that were, achieved based on the tests that you run. So let's go to the sixth approach, which is to validate the JSON schema. So you can do it in different manners, right? So the one that I'm proposing here in this example is to use a library called AJV. So when you use AJV, you can instantiate an object of AJV, and then this object will basically store the validation based on the compilation of a schema. And this schema, you can say we have a object. This object has three properties like ID, name, email. ID is integer, name and email are string, and we have ID, name, and email as required properties. And then you can programmatically call some API or some endpoint, and then based on the response, you can compare with the schema that was programmatically created using AJV. And then as soon as you do that, you can then use some assertion library like Chai, for example, in order to compare if the result that comes from AJV is true. And if it's true, it means that the structure that came on the response are the same created for the schema using AJV. So this is a very good way and quick way to validate the schemas of your JSON responses. So let's go to the last one. Contract testing using some tool or some library like Pact.js, for example. So you can see here that I have a code where I'm using Pact, and Pact is basically a library that will help us to do contract testing. I'm also using Chai and a unit test library to have the structure to create my tests in this case, and then be able to run it using a runner. So what I do here basically is to define who will be the consumer and the provider and what will be the port. And then I can start to set up this provider and create an interaction. This interaction will basically talk more about what is expected when I do some request. So what I'm saying here is that as soon as I do a request for a specific endpoint, then I will have a response that is a response that has the status code and also the body and all the informations that are needed. So as soon as I add that interaction to the provider, and then I do that request, I will be able to check some information that comes in the response and also verify the provider to see if it's working as expected. So using this approach, we can not only check the JSON schema, but also if the request is being done properly and if the information that is trafficating between the both services, the provider and the consumer, are working as expected. So that's the end of this presentation. I hope you learn more about REST API testing, and I hope these examples will help you as well to start searching more about how to implement it in your day-by-day work, and then you'll be able to become more expert in how to test REST APIs, and it will help you and your team on how to test better. So it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you have a very good conference and you learn a lot about software testing in this TestFlix edition. See you soon. Bye-bye.